Hello and welcome to Identirati Office Hours. I'm your host, Mike Schwartz, founder of Glue. Today is episode 213. And before we get started, a quick reminder, please follow Identirati Office Hours on LinkedIn and YouTube. That really helps support us. Our topic today is a CNCF Cedar update. Many of you know Cedar is one of our periodic topics we're returning to, and we felt like it was time to come back to Cedar today. Our guest today is John Kastner, Senior Applied Scientist in Automated Reasoning at AWS, and Rohit Khare, who today I'm announcing as Cedar enthusiast and unofficial co-host. Welcome, guys.
Thanks.
So John, since Rohit's been on like 15 times before, but you're a new Identirati. So maybe you could just tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, like you said, I'm a senior applied scientist at AWS, but I guess more than that, I'm really here today as one of the maintainers of the Cedar policy language, which I've been working on for almost 5 years now since we first started developing it inside of AWS. So I've been there from the beginning, and I've seen everything about how it's changed over time to get to where we are today as now a CNCF sandbox project. But before AWS, I did a master's degree in computer science at the University of Maryland and spent some time working at a startup with some of the people who ultimately went on to work on Cedar. And in that startup, we were doing a lot of really interesting work around sort of the software security space and looking at how to improve existing legacy software for memory safety in a world before LLMs. So I think maybe the landscape has changed there since this was last work.
Yeah, to say the least.
Yeah.
So, I just checked the dates of the paper that we mentioned in the episode notes. And by the way, every episode has notes. It's glue.co/IOH- the episode number. So we linked the original paper, or one of the first papers is 2 years old now, from I think July of 2024. So in that time, Cedar was contributed to the CNCF. And just to make sure that I do justice to the title, which is CNCF Cedar Update. Maybe you could just give us some of your quick thoughts on what's changed now that CNCF is in the Cedar, in the CNCF umbrella.
Right. I guess, just to give the full context for anyone unaware, Cedar started out inside of Amazon, where we were developing it internally, but only for a very brief amount of time. Only barely a year we were developing it internally before we decided that this was really something that should be in the open source so that everyone could see it. And so then we open sourced it, and around the same time we released this published this paper that you're talking about, giving the full details of the Cedar policy language and its symbolic compilation techniques and the proofs of correctness for all of this. And so at the same time, we decided that the code itself should be open source so that people can inspect it and build confidence in its correctness and understand exactly what we had done to be so confident it's correct. Now, it took us a little while longer to get around to this idea that really being open source isn't enough. Just having the code out there for people to see, that meets the goals we set out when we open sourced it of transparency, building trust with the community to understand our code, but it lacks something in terms of building a long-term community. And I think this is where we're hoping that the CNCF membership is going to really boost Cedar. So we joined the CNCF as a sandbox project. I think that was last October, and since then, well, we've been working through a bunch of little hang-ups in the onboarding process, trying to formalize that. And I think I can say actually it was just at the end of last month. So just now, we finally finished the last onboarding task to actually get officially dotted T's, crossed I's, all of that into a CNCF, being a full CNCF sandbox project. So I think the last hang-up there is we had to get one of our domains transferred over, and there was a technical hang-up on that. So that's to say, we're in it, and now we're looking towards the future and what's it going to be for the Cedar, what's it mean for Cedar to be in the CNCF going on from here. There are a lot of open governance questions we have to sort out in terms of how we want to manage the project now that it's not a now that it is in the CNCF on its own. And we're working on those. We have some drafts on government documents, and we're reviewing these with our maintainers.
First off, go Terps! Glad to see it. Went to school out there as well. A great, kind of amazing to see a career that has any kind of a straight line to it these days. So I love that you have some expertise in thinking of control methods, and then being able to apply that to memory safety, and now at Amazon Applied Science. It sounds like it was already a pretty big team when you got there. What do you look back on this journey and say, what has prepared you for handling both the kind of academic side of collaboration and making progress, where there are some markers on how to build a team and how to build alignment? And what have you learned that's different about working with CNCF and working with different kinds of stakeholders, and your role both in corralling presumably multiple people at Amazon who have opinions, as well as multiple people who have opinions?
So starting from an academic sort of point of view, you have really one customer, and that's the reviewers on whatever you're trying to get published. You don't have to think too broadly. You have a vision that you want to implement. Moving towards developing Cedar inside of Amazon, we had to start thinking about, well, what do people here really want to use? What is the problem we're solving? And how do we build something that they appreciate and they'll use and they'll benefit from? But inside of one company, even a rather large company like AWS is, it's still a limited scope where you have this bounded set of problems you're trying to solve, and you can kind of set out, okay, well, this is the problem people have with authorization inside of AWS, and here's how we're going to solve it. And this is where these ideas with analyzability of policies really came from, because that was a key problem inside of AWS that people were identifying and attempting to solve in the existing authorization space, but there was a gap there. So that's really where we came up with the idea of Cedar, saying we're going to solve that. Moving to the CNCF, I think it's
no, please.
I think it's harder because that key problem, I mean, people have that problem, but maybe they haven't identified it quite yet. So we have to convince them that this is a problem they need to solve, or more charitably, we should figure out what problems they do want to solve and start to position Cedar as a solution to those, to the extent that its underlying design principles allow it.
Well, this is what I want to follow up a little bit more on, which is, kind of just the personal side of the stories of what you found interesting about in this wider community. As someone whose academic career was in web and web standards, and both as a participant in the standards process and as someone who's written about how standards happen, it's interesting to think about collaborations in multiple companies, multiple aspects of intellectual property rights, and most of all, multiple stakeholders, people for whom necessarily analyzability or framing the problem in those terms may not be there. So I was just curious as well, if you just moving on to that, other ways in which being an academic and that perspective has helped, and other ways in which you are learning new things about how to collaborate in this world, or working with multiple stakeholders.
I guess I'm not quite sure what the question is there.
It's like just working with different people than the academic project, right? The point is, building consensus is harder than building a community is a lot harder and a lot broader than just a technical debate.
Yeah, I suppose that's a good point, getting at the governance question for the Cedar project going forward. It's again kind of drawing a similar trajectory inside of Amazon. We had the ability to direct the project as we saw fit. As we were an open source project, not in the CNCF, we were thinking more about these questions about how do we make sure we're not causing issues, that we're respecting the open source adopters of Cedar. And now as a CNCF project, we really need to bring in all of these adopters, all of the stakeholders into the decision-making process. And exactly what that process looks like is not something we've hammered out. I think that's sort of the key question that we need to solve as we look towards the future, in getting into the incubation stage. These are the questions that we need to answer.
Before doing this live stream, I actually did a podcast about open source software, and I interviewed 80 different or 70 different founders of open source companies. And I sort of have theories about the different types of open source projects out there and how they're funded. And I break them into three categories. Like, we have pure play open source projects where you have a company that's behind a project. They're driving innovation of that project because it's basically their commercial product. And then we have sort of collective foundation projects like Kubernetes, where a bunch of companies realize they want this piece of software. There's no competitive advantage to them in building. They might as well collaborate, and they pool their money together to fund this shared expense. And then we have what I would call the most underfunded portion, which is individuals who love something, or a group of individuals who love something and decide to build software around it and are sometimes need more resources. Groups A and groups B, you have basically paid professional open source developers,
Right.
who it takes a long time to train and actually to get here. In group C, we have a sort of more need, I think, and sometimes unpaid developers, which is bad.
Yeah.
And I feel like, but there's always a reason why an open source project, there's always a business reason why this software is being written. I mean, no one's writing Cedar for fun.
Right.
And so it seemed to me like there was an alignment of Amazon to solve this problem from a business perspective. And at the same time, there was a realization that this was a shared problem that others were encountering, and there could be a benefit in innovation to building a community around that shared problem. And contributing it to the CNCF is good, but even when projects are in these types of organizations, like Styra is a good example. They contributed OPA to the CNCF, but you still need Styra there promoting OPA. So I guess, it's a good step contributing it to a foundation because it makes maybe the IP and the governance more clear, but there's still an implicit understanding with a very new technology that we need that one company who is behind it, who's really pushing it and making this effort real. And the perception originally was that this was an Amazon technology, and now contributing it to the CNCF makes it governed by the community, which is good, but it's still an Amazon project because without Amazon, I'm not sure this thing can happen. Like, who else is going to step in? And
that is an interesting perspective, and maybe you could talk a little bit more for me about exactly what the model that Styro and OPA is working on here. Because I think our perspective going into the CNCF is that yes, prior to this point, Cedar was an Amazon project. But going forward, we want to move away from that and really let people build confidence that the existence of this tool isn't solely tied to the interest of Amazon in its success. And I mean, you of course have interest in its success, and so that's good. We like having people who are invested in its success for their own personal interest, their personal financial interest even. And so we kind of are hesitant to fully embrace the idea that it remains an AWS project because we don't want it to be just an AWS project. We want it to be a lot more than that. So can you, I don't know, maybe explain to me a little bit about how OPA has navigated this tension?
Well, I'm not sure OPA is a good example because they went out of business and Styra Aqua hired them.
Yeah, sorry.
Apple.
You have any thought?
Yeah.
I would say, the question about platform businesses to me always comes from also a bit of the economics background as this classic Wall Street comment. Yes, but where are the customers' yachts, right? As people who supply technology industry, it's kind of like the brokers or some of the insiders. We all see the advances. You can lay out a technology roadmap and kind of on the supply side of technology innovations, and we're often used to there being some champion, evangelist, some sponsor, or some company. But the real sign of when things are getting multi-stakeholder successes is when you start seeing that other people are making money ultimately on using this technology, right? And the proxy for that's taking it one step earlier is the signs that people are solving and adapting the tool for their own purposes in their own communities. And so when, OPA to some degree kind of emerged around the same time as both, it's somewhat in parallel, and then kind of hugged more and more some use cases around Kubernetes. Kubernetes also came out in the market in a way that it talked about policy in a way that spoke to a larger group of new developers. And so now you've got people thinking about it, and that the huge boom in people being exposed to CNCF generally through Kubernetes, and being exposed to the idea that policies might mean anything from security policies to network admission policies to, adding and draining clusters in real time type policies, help move that conversation along. And so OPA started getting its use cases outside of that. So it's the moment of not being so much one company renouncing things as it is other companies also investing in it. I think early in Cedar, Strong DM and other successful vendors, have gone on interesting things and bet on Cedar. But there's almost also another tension to it, like being Cedar inside, right? So if the allusion to the old 90s Intel inside campaign, it's an ingredient brand, right? So that's another challenge there too in building a stakeholder community. So the key is that right now, yes, it's true that Cedar is moved and putting in the governance foundations for being a much more multi-stakeholder, multilateral thing. But one of the things, analysts are also entitled to step back and say is, hey, where's the Amazon verified permissions business going? Where's the Lattice business going? Where are the other hyperscalers and the other smaller startups that are building innovative things on there? Where's the kind of evangelism work, or as you call it today, developer relations work of the gallery of success stories of adopting Cedar in new and interesting places? So absolutely the case, and you have to embark down that path. So OPA, I think, benefits from having a couple more logos on the race car, as I say on the race car slide. But mostly the question of when the street finds its own uses for technology, then you start seeing other people finding ways that solves their problem. So finally, I'd probably say the last way to lens on this one is, who's getting promoted? How does this move the needle on someone's OKRs or corporate objectives right now? Right. And so sometimes it's as much a matter of producing a new technology as producing a new set of metrics. Without branching off to GovOps land, governance as DevOps, another area we talk a lot about here, it is relevant just to point out that it's not just that a moment in time has to come along when, hey, we can use Git, we can use continuous integration, continuous builds and development. And a moment like internet SaaS companies that say, we don't have to release the fall 2027 release of our software. We can just ship every time it turns green. But you had to couple that with things like these metrics, like mean time to deploy and the emergence of new job titles. Like I'm moving up from being a sysadmin or an SRE to being a DevOps manager. Those are also signs that people are there. So how does it help? How do you see the early signs of multi-stakeholder adoption? Because it's making their companies money, because it's getting them promotions, because it's being used in new ways by the street. Those are all things to look for.
Yeah, I mean, some of these are hard to look for because, if someone's using Cedar inside of their own company, we don't necessarily have any signal of that. I mean, if they come to talk to us, and then we might
absolutely right.
We might figure that out, but we don't necessarily know. Obviously, for the AVP side of things, we're gonna have a better signal on that. But just given the position that we are inside of AWS, but the signal I really like to look for, and I'm always excited when I see this. This is, I guess, what excites me, is when I see someone that's not trying to sell Cedar onwards in a product, but when I see someone who said, this is, in our product, when you want to write authorization rules, you want to write policies to control access to whatever resource we have, you write that with Cedar policies. And that is, I think that's the most exciting one to see, is they're exposing Cedar to their customers in a way that Cedar isn't like the product. They're not selling an authorization service. They're just using it for authorization. And that's when that's when Cedar's doing what it's meant to do. And it means we've successfully solved at least one real problem someone had.
That's how you get from being a product to being infrastructure.
I'm always on the lookout for those use cases, and maybe going a little bit further with the analogy to OPA and Rego. OPA, I think you need to find the killer application, and they found the killer application was Kubernetes access control.
Right.
And then they put their OPA into the organization that also is the Kubernetes organization. So it wasn't just putting it at the CNCF, but they put it at the CNCF because the application for OPA was cloud. And it's not clear that the application for cloud will be Cedar because that niche is already filled by OPA.
Right.
So maybe Cedar would have been better off at the AI Agentic Foundation, because maybe Cedar's a better fit for MCP. Like, go to the next thing. Don't try and do the thing that OPA already succeeded at, allegedly succeeded.
Right. I think that's maybe a little bit of a tricky point because in all of those cases, right, I think Cedar is a perfect fit for this sort of cloud authorization space. But you are right to point out that space, that niche, is occupy already. But this is going back to the point I think the drum we beat on with Cedar all the time is that Cedar isn't trying to beat out any of these other authorization technologies, because we acknowledge that the problems it solves, that what it can apply to directly are different. Because we intentionally restrict the policies you can write to maintain the analyzability of the Cedar policies and allow us to answer difficult queries about the behavior and relative behavior of sets of policies. We think that both of these can exist in parallel, where some applications, both for AI and for cloud spaces, will want to use Cedar to take advantage of this. But there are also applications that we know of just kind of outside the space of what Cedar is designed to handle. So for both applications, Cedar has a definite niche, but it's not the end-all solution in either case.
Well, this all speaks to the fact that timing is a huge part of success in life and life generally. And the story of the moment is, of course, AI. And I was curious about how much that does affect the roadmap and the adoption prospect for Cedar. I sometimes explain to people that, that usually I'm still pitching Cedar or other policy languages. Usually it's the first time people thought about the comparative advantages and disadvantages of these different policy languages. The first uphill battle is just convince people that you have to take authorization logic out of the spaghetti code built into your app and pull it out into something that is separately manageable and editable by customers when needed. Right? Most people realize that you can't get to hello world without solving the SSO problem or authentication. So I can say, hello, John, you've logged in. And so someone usually realizes that if they're writing their own username and password authentication system, they might be doing it wrong today. But it's usually several releases in before you realize, well, every time you do log in, what your privileges are in that app differ from app semantics to app semantics. And it might be a while for someone realizes, wait, it's version 3. We need to pull out the ability to say who can be the listing an auction, who can change the price of an auction, who can say that an auction has been closed down. These are all different roles and so on. And that's when that happens. And at that point, we lead with issues about how easy is this tool to use, what languages is it available in, analyzability and tractability may not be for mind. And so that's where you have to kind of put the benefits of these differences in place, right? What's the salient differentiator? So really the aside, I guess I'm putting it back in Jeopardy form of a question. The challenge is, how is AI affecting the deployment and usability of Cedar in practice? What are some of your hopes and dreams about what the next level innovation might be? Because when I think about giving someone a toolkit, there's a difference like right across the street from our house is both a Home Depot and an IKEA. And when someone wants a chair, do you point them at the 2x4s and the lumber over at Home Depot, or do you point them at saying, hey, if you can find something that's pre-made and ready to assemble at IKEA? It's a choice. And with Cedar, you have, again, the ability of building anything you want there. But one of the challenges, too, is defining what your permissions are going to be, defining, your vocabulary and your space and your schemas. And so there's some examples from there about how is AI easier and different to build with Cedar in 2026 and 27 than even when you started.
This is one of the problems that we have directly been trying to tackle for this AI space of what your schemes and policies look like when you're writing, you're trying to write access control rules governing the behavior of agents. And so this is one we worked at we have a tool for translating MCP tool definitions into Cedar schemas to try to create this more standardized way of writing policies to control what tools an agent can use. And so this is part of the open source. This is an open source offering as part of Cedar, and we've actually inside of Amazon we've seen some adoption of this specifically for the intended purpose that when you want to control what tools an agent is able to use, you use this structured schema, which has a consistent format for whatever your tools are, derived deterministically from the definition of those tools, and then you can write policies against that. And of course, having that sort of structured definition of what is a valid policy is very beneficial for agents writing your policies, because this is something people want to do nowadays. They don't want to write the code, they want to have the agents write the code. For policies, this is a little bit questionable, just on the kind of the fact that you would rather like to know what your policies are actually authorizing. But nonetheless, people will do it if they're able to. And so Cedar definitely gives, is very well designed for this space because it gives you the tools to validate your policies, but also to go back to policy analysis. This is where it becomes a really powerful tool, because policy analysis can apply in the background as a feedback loop for the agent to give it the ability to write policies with knowledge of these semantic constraints. And it can also be used to present the user with very structured information about how exactly an agent has changed the policies. So one of the ways we do this is we can present like a per action analysis saying, for this particular action that might be authorized, it's now more permissive, but for this one, it's less permissive. And so rather than having to think about your whole policy set, that if you had an agent edit it, we can tell you that actually everything but this action wasn't changed. It's just this one. So look at that code and make sure that matches your intent.
So I'll exit this one by pointing out that I think a word we should come back to a bit later on in the conversation is hallucinations, right? The general fear about using AI with security is the same fear about AI in a lot of enterprise applications, which is that, hey, it's telling me this policy is going to be giving my expense report agent more limited powers than I have, so it's safe to run. But in fact, it's different when you have the assurance of just something that's coming out of this plain text trying to persuade you that it's safer versus something that's been proven with some other set of
Right. The buzzword here is neurosymbolic AI. So rather than just having AI generate some text and maybe try to test, see if it's right, you look at it, see if it's right. If we can apply automated reasoning techniques like what we've developed for Cedar, we can give you confidence that it does do what it says it does, up to the degree that we can encode what it should do as a formal constraint, which is a problem on its own. And Cedar is well suited for this because of its because we're able to actually encode these constraints as opposed to general purpose languages where that sort of problem is intractable.
I want to push back a little bit and say it's hypothetically better at this, because I wonder if the tooling really matches up to the promise of Cedar. Because when in previous episodes, we've had Amina Torlek on, Neha was on, we've had done several episodes. And the theme that always emerges is that Cedar is better than Rego and Cell because it's analyzable. And
right, that is the line.
Syntaxes are analyzable. And that's great if you can actually do that analysis to do meaningful things. But the tooling, I wonder if the tooling is really sufficient to achieve those benefits. And if the tooling is embryonic today, is that are we going to have time to catch up the tooling? And what would you prioritize in terms of improving the tooling so we can actually realize that promise that analyzable will bring benefits?
This is running in production now. So we're running policy analysis on real policies written by customers in production right now. So certainly the tooling's there and it works, and you can run the real analysis and understand what is going on with your policies. In terms of
we've actually implemented the analysis tools at Glue. So I agree that they're there, but the question is if that's your differentiator, that feature has to make your thing 10 times better than Cell or Rego, and it's not there today. I can tell you that the promise is very alluring, but the reality is that I can is that how do you actually make this stuff useful is maybe not that apparent. And as putting my engineering hat on, my VPE hat on, I would say, there's a lot of things that we could be doing. And the question is, what do we prioritize? And I want to prioritize the things with the biggest impact. And if analysis is our big differentiator, what needs to be prioritized to make that actual technical advantage really a reality for customers to use? Or is the thought that the Rust Cedar analysis toolkit is it? That's what we have.
Right. So this is I think maybe what you're getting at is a common question in the automated reasoning software verification space, which is that we can have a good tool which implements a program analysis, and then experts are able to use that tool to amazing effect for verifying programs and having really a deep verification of what their software does and knowing that it's correct. But most people aren't going to want to do that day to day, even if they're able to, just because of the time and effort involved. So it's about figuring out like what the push button analysis is. What is it that what can we provide that is, out of the box, one click? You don't have to write a specification, and nonetheless, we're able to provide you a useful tool. So Cedar has like some of this that works pretty well out of the box now for simple queries. Like if you want to know if two policies or sets of policies are equivalent, we can tell you that, which is a powerful tool for any sort of refactoring that you might want to do, which works really well with the sort of agentic development paradigm, where if you expect the policies don't change, we can assert that. But maybe what you're saying is that while being powerful and being a very useful tool, isn't a 10 times multiplier tool. So I think the question is like, what is that tool? What do people want? What are the properties people really care about in their policies? And how can we make it work out of the box for this?
I can be a little more specific. And Neha has used this in the interview that I posted on MongoDB that she did a while back. She mentioned the idea that we want to be able to make universal statements. A is true.
Yeah.
And say, can I show that A is true given this policy set and this schema and this data? And so I think that's what people want. People want to be able to say, well, you told me I could prove things. Can I actually practically do it?
Maybe this is where I'm pushing back a little bit. I guess I don't have a quote from Neha on this, but from my discussions with her a couple of years ago now, the emphasis, which is still, I think, widely held by among many people, is that people don't want to do proofs. They don't want to write a specification and formally prove that specification holds, because writing a specification that actually matches your understanding of what it should do is very difficult. They want a zero specification analysis tool where we tell you this is true. And we're telling you this is true for all inputs. And so we're giving you that universal guarantee about the behavior of the policy, but without forcing you to sit down and write out a specification beforehand, just because that barrier to entry makes the tools, while enormously powerful for anyone who does want to adopt it, just the barrier to entry means that it can never really be that 10 times multiplier that you're looking for.
Let me attempt to translate a few of the things we've talked about here. Mike, if you will.
Sure, please.
We talk about proving some statement about the system, like in MongoDB. I'd love to be able to say, my database always keeps data encrypted at rest, right? And that's a more program analysis challenge than it is, say, an authorization challenge. But I want to say, people who make backups to the database don't suddenly get access to the data in it. Right now, that's an interesting question. I'm saying, hey, there's a bunch of operations in my database to make backups and take snapshots, and I want certain operators to be able to run those programs, run those commands. But does that mean that I'm leaking my customer revenues to those same low-level folks who are just running the backups? Or is the ability to create a backup giving me a backdoor to read data that I shouldn't otherwise be able to read in that table? The problem is coming up with those hypotheses. Said one is that people don't want to necessarily think that. The other is that you provide a library of those well-known principles. So to be very concrete, one interesting use case from Sarah Cicchetti as a former PM on Cedar as well, and proposed a tool called Carapace, which is building on the hype and excitement around OpenClaw, saying how would you harden, these lobsters, OpenClaw, or in this case, Claudry Hepburn, I think is her thing, Claudry.com, Clawdrey, and you'll find a system there called Carapace, which uses Cedar to create permissions on the fly for the Unix tools her agent might call. And, this is definitely not what I've run by her, so I may be butchering quite a bit in the process. So I take no responsibility on her. But if you said, look, I want to know if this agent code I'm looking at here is going to delete any files. I don't want it to lose anything. And you say, aha, there's a tool called RM, and I can see here that it's always denied. So, I'm denying this agent the ability to remove files in my environment. RM is the permission, and I can see it's blocked. That's great. But you may also not have enough of the world knowledge brought to bear to say, actually, what I meant was I don't want to lose data. And if someone can run the cat tool and overwrite cat 0 bytes, and I've now lost all the bytes in the file, it's erased it, but it still exists, does that mean that's exactly the the reputation formal methods has had in our community and formal world for 50 years. Engineers are the worst kind of correct. Technically correct. Technically you didn't run RM, you just lost all the content of the file, or maybe you took out all the ability to manipulate the file system, but you removed it from the Git expunge history, and so I can't recover that old state. And that level of paranoia and thinking is the hard part. I don't want to do that. I want to both not have to deal with I want the convenience of just asking a system, hey, is this safe for me to run? I grabbed off the internet as a prompt and help me file my expense reports in this company. And the thing might be motivated to hallucinate or lie or persuade me that it sounds right. And I'd rather have evidence. On the other hand, I don't have a library of these kinds of commands and concepts. And that's another part of coming back to the theme of today's session. In terms of building community, another big thing you usually find around open source communities that are successful over time is both not just a tool or a library or a GitHub repo, and not just maybe a great landing site and product marketing and documentation and highlights and case studies of who's succeeded with it, but often like a contrib directory. There's a lot of other knowledge flywheels that have to grow up around it about saying, here are some downloadable examples of, how to do a file system in Cedar, or what are permissions like, or, here's a worked example in some domain. And so the contrib directory over time might have, here's a bunch of assertions about, encryption at rest, or here's how you want to do SOC compliance. Here's a bunch of, libraries about various well-known industry regulations. What are some of your hopes and developments going on in the community, and that make you excited about what's being developed as the information around Cedar, the things that are other than just the core code that show signs of healthy community building?
Right. Yeah. So I think my hope and dream for this sort of direction is that we really need to establish, this maybe what you're getting at with your ideas of like, what are the properties around, cryptography, whatever, that we need these libraries of concretely like Cedar schemas for different domains. And if we can start building that out and say, okay, well, here's the Cedar schema that you want to write, and it represents file systems. And so it tells you these are the actions you can take in a file system. And here are like here's a structure, a record in Cedar that represents like file metadata and all of this. And this is just like this is the canonical representation of this in Cedar. I think this is something that has been asked for and that we haven't delivered on. And the reason we've been hesitant to do it, despite the fact that I think it would be a very powerful feature for Cedar to have, is that we don't know that we want to be the ones dictating what this standard is. But maybe we should be on that. But
I was smiling as you're using the word "we," because this is indeed the transition point that happens in a lot of communities, is as "we" changes meaning. We as an initial sponsor, or the research lab at some university who wants to contribute it, and then the "we" grows to encompass more and more people.
Right. Maybe
that's a great example. I mean, I think that it's one thing for Amazon DevRel to come down and say, here's how you should manage Slack permissions if you're writing a Slack bot, and you're both dealing with a bunch of corporate things, PR things. What are you telling people to do? It's a very different thing when someone's on a mailing list openly saying, hey, I just hacked together this thing, and here's my recommendation on how to write a set of Cedar policies for my Slack bot.
It's a really good point, actually, because we as the CNCF sandbox project, maybe that we has a better position to be making recommendations. So I think that's actually a really good point to sit on there. That maybe it means as we move as we are in the CNCF, it's an appropriate time to start to adopt that sort of making that sort of recommendation for users of Cedar. So,
right, it's like a user group, not just the developer group.
Right. So that's a really good point for us to try to dig away.
We're running low on time, so I'm gonna list my two frustrations with Cedar.
Go for it.
Take both of them. One of them is on outreach.
Sure.
And maybe this is tied to what you're saying. I actually don't think you should be defining like mappings for MCP. I mean, this is good as user community contributed stuff. Here's how you can map MCP to Cedar, FYI. Here's how we can map API or file system. Like the community should do that, not the project. Although it could be good fodder for examples, for tutorials or stuff. I think it's fine in that sense. But in general, the outreach has been, when I look at the outreach for OpenSearch and I compare that to the outreach for Cedar, they're both open source projects that Amazon is active in, but one Oh, OpenSearch is at every single, OpenSearch will be at the MCP Dev Conference, for example, for sure. They'll have a table. They have their own conference, several of them. And then Cedar is like the most esoteric, standard. So it doesn't get the same level of attention to be conservative. So outreach is and I wonder if how we're going to get adoption without outreach. Every open source project needs an outreach component. So that's one of my concerns. My other concern is about deployable tools. So like Java, you could say, well, jar files are outside of Java. How you actually, make a zip file and put together jar files or Java files, like that's out of scope of Java. But yet people wouldn't have been able to write a Java programs, and Java wouldn't have been able to get popular if there was no way to put Java files and resources together. If you had to like keep your file directory and make sure all those files directories were synchronized. So I feel like the tooling that developers and deployers actually need to make this work is always out of scope of Cedar. And one of the main problems is like, why was OPA successful? Well, actually, the Styra team did a lot of great videos and how-tos and roadshows and CNCF talks and evangelized it. It wasn't an accident, and showed people how they can use it by connecting to something that they really needed. You could use MCP instead of Kubernetes. So the outreach is lacking. And then the tools, I think developers have no idea how to approach policy authoring in Cedar. They understand how to construct a policy. That's easy enough. But how do you manage 1,000 policies? Because no application has one policy. And how do we manage schema at an enterprise level? And that area just seems to be completely ignored as like out of scope. So,
yeah, I think that's probably that's definitely a fair read on the view we've taken on as the scope of Cedar. Maybe a large part of that is the consequence of the fact that this current Cedar development team is, coming at it from the perspective of language design experts and not as career engineers, and so maybe we're lacking a little bit of perspective in terms of how people actually go about using these things, and so it might just be a gap in our collective experience to really be able to address that point.
Right? Am I off base? Thoughts?
No, I think it's a reminder that, products are a complete thing. I mean, I have some of my, from being an academic to more of a product manager. And so the complete solution is part of the picture, right? That, there's an influential essay going around, I'll throw a link in there, but about saying, at this moment when we're having so much AI investment by enterprises, and yet you're also hearing like a lot of pilots are failing or so on. Someone's drawing the analogy to that means we just haven't seen a platform emerge yet. And if you think about the very early days of the web, it was like we had CGI bin scripts, like MCP scripts. And it took a long journey from there to app servers and Java beans and a lot of evangelism, a lot of training to be able to think of what we consider as a modern LAMP stack or a 3-tier web architecture. The ability for someone to write, oh, that's a simple CRUD SaaS application, was almost a decade that needs to be speed run there. And so what might be missing here is that all the complementary products that go from saying, yep, at a certain point, in 99 or 2000, you had all the ingredients to build an Amazon, as a giant e-commerce platform. But in fact, took a much longer period of time for everyone in the industry to figure out how we've also build things, before you get to like a Shopify or so on too. So in that analogy, the bare language spec, absolutely great to have that be in a place that it's, ratified and independent and has a steward that's independent of any one company. But beyond a language come libraries, comes tools, comes help, comes examples. And I hope that to see, also events and meetings and conferences, and you're plugging into a whole infrastructure that Linux Foundation has worked on over the years in many spaces. And I'm looking forward and excited about all that. That's why we've also invested, and that's why there is such credibility to being in the CNCF process as part of Linux Foundation in turn. So with that all in mind, I mean, I absolutely agree that the complete solution is out there, and I think that we are surrounded by insurmountable opportunities. I think that the risks that we're taking is that you can almost argue there's like a multi-trillion-dollar hole at the center of this AI economy, which is that hallucination is a risk, and narrow symbolic systems are one of the best paths forward. And in the narrower sense of within computer security, we have no shortage of tools, but we definitely have a shortage of easy to use ones that provide a complete story for batteries included approaches to adding authorization to your project. And if you look at some of the other entries in the space, I think that's what we have to look at. Yeah, so here's to seeing it be successful, and here's how seeing things that are beyond the code and beyond the language spec also becoming part of this community.
Yeah. The pigeons are flying, so it tells us that we're actually over on time by 3 minutes. So
Wow.
let me just give John last thoughts before we break.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe just going last thing to close on is that we have the KubeCon coming up in November. You were complaining that we haven't been at those, and I am happy to report that coming up at that KubeCon, we're going to have a Project Lightning talk, giving an update on the status of the Cedar project. And then we also, with our collaborator, Lucas Kaldstrom, he has a talk accepted with someone, at least thus far, who hasn't been working with the Cedar project, talking about how they're using Cedar to authorize access to MCP servers. So we've got some cool talks coming up at KubeCon, hoping to see some people there who want to talk about Cedar and learn about how it's getting used. Yeah, and we would really love to have any contributions coming in, just like we were saying, with defining these schemas for file system access or MCP server access, and getting the community engaged on that would be a massive success for the Cedar project.
Okay, so I will just quickly announce the next episode. Paul Lanzi, get the most out of your identity solutions provider. It'll be slightly less technical talk, but a good one. Paul's a great keynote speaker. Another quick reminder to follow the live stream, help us get to 3,000 followers on LinkedIn and YouTube. I always forget about YouTube, but it's on YouTube too. And with that, I will say thank you so much, John, for giving us a window into the Cedar land, and thank you for all of the amazing contributions, because we do love Cedar around here. So it's coming from a good place.
Yeah.
And Rohit, also thank you, of course, for helping me co-host this one especially when I need technical backup. So.
Well, thank you both for sharing your wisdom and your experiences.
Yeah, it was good to be here.
Yeah.
And with that, I'll say also thank you, audience, and we'll see you next time.